Hello and welcome to the Rooted to Truth podcast. I'm so glad you decided to tune in today because this is the very first episode of our study through Article 2 of the Constitution. Here on the show, we have been going through the Constitution very slowly. And I know maybe it seems a little too slow at times, but I feel like there's so much there to unpack that our leisurely pace is really well worth it. So for the last few months, we've been going through Article 1, and now we're going to be jumping into Article 2. And if you'll reflect back on any sort of government study that you did back in school, the second article listed in the Constitution discusses the executive branch and the executive powers. At first, I planned to just kind of jump right into the study, but I feel like it's really necessary for me to just be candid with you for a moment. If I'm completely honest, approaching this episode was a very difficult task just because our nation's constitution is truly this minefield of precious gems. But considering that the state of our nation is so contrary to the constitutional way, I was feeling very discouraged, asking myself, well, what's the point? And perhaps you're in the same position where you're feeling frustrated with our nation and our nation's leadership, and you have every right to be. But I think something that really helps me when I'm feeling discouraged is reflecting, number one, on the faithfulness of God, and number two, reminding myself of the Great Commission, which is to display Christ's love to this dying world. The Lord has given us stewardship here in America. Yes, we are to live with our mindset fixed on heaven, but God has given us gifts here on earth that we must watch over. The Lord sees our hearts and watches the decisions that we make. As believers, we are to recognize that our decisions here on earth do not just impact our lives here, but they stand for a greater purpose that is something unseen by the naked eye. And what I mean by that is the Lord has commanded us to love our neighbors as ourselves, right? So if we are to love our neighbors, we are to do everything that we can here on earth to demonstrate that love of Christ to those around us. And oftentimes, the way that we do that is through the decisions that we make. The Lord entrusts us with financial resources, with circumstantial resources, and those things can be used to glorify Him. It's the same thing with our stewardship as citizens of America. We are to watch over the citizenship that we have been given here for the greater cause of showing America who God is. So as I dive into this study, I want us to have that mindset at the forefront because if we will listen to the words of our founders and hear about what their intentions were in the framing of the executive branch, and then we look at what we have now, I think we'll end up feeling utterly discouraged. There's no doubt that the state of our nation is on the brink of something that America has never seen before. But when all of the things around us fade away, it is the biblical principle that remains. And it is our duty to apply biblical principles to everything that we do. The Bible says whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Eating and drinking are earthly actions, and those 2 points are followed up with the word all, meaning that everything, including voting, poll watching, engaging civically, whatever it may be, everything should be done for God's glory. We're not to strive for a specific outcome no matter how desperately we know our nation needs it. We must do what is right and trust God with the results because honestly, we might never see the results we hoped for. Doing the right thing shouldn't just be for a specific outcome. It should be for glorifying God with our decisions. He is the one who judges and rewards based on the hearts of men. And at the end of this life on earth, we are going to stand before Him and Him alone to reflect upon our actions. So anyways, with that being said today, I want to discuss with you the Electoral College and how the president is to be elected. especially with November elections really just being around the corner and with another presidential election being a few years away. I think it's so important to have an understanding of what is constitutional so that we can share truth with others. And it's important that we have the right mindset going in, trusting God with the outcome, but still being faithful with what He has given us, and that is the ability to partake in the election of our leaders. So without further ado, let's get started. Government, like clocks, go from the motion men give them. And as governments are made and moved by men, so by them they are ruined too. Wherefore governments rather depend upon men than men upon governments. Let men be good, and the government cannot be bad. But if men be bad, let the government be never so good. They will endeavor to warp and spoil it to their turn. That was a quote from a colonial reverend named William Penn. What William saw was how easily things can corrode and deteriorate over time if not upheld and kept in check by people with intentionality and with a heart to do good. That being said, I have a bone to pick with our voting system, and that is we have not had a constitutional presidential election since 1844. Yes, that's right. You heard me. In addition to that, our voting system is no longer reliable and free from being tampered with. And worst of all, our voters have lost their interest in understanding how to cast a responsible vote. I have noticed that there has been a lot of shady business in our elections, but I never would have thought that constitutionally speaking, our elections have not technically abided by law since 1844. That absolutely blows my mind. And how it came about was through slow and subtle adjustments that eventually led to an absolute disregard for the actual rule of law. So before I can explain to you the unconstitutionality of our last 170 plus years of elections, I must begin by giving an analysis of the Electoral College. I always found it extremely confusing why we needed an Electoral College, since our nation is supposed to be for the people and by the people. Wouldn't it just make the most sense for everyone to cast their vote for president and then the candidate with the majority of the votes become president-elect? That would make sense if we were electing a king, because kings rule directly over the people. But we do not have a monarchy here in America. We have a constitutional republic, and in a constitutional republic, states have sovereignty in decision-making and are not to be completely dictated by a supreme ruler of the land. Hence why we have different branches of government which all function in a checks and balances system. Kings rule over people and are supposed to be responsible in watching over their interests, but presidents are to watch over the states. Presidents are to work on behalf of the states, specifically in the foreign realm. And a president is supposed to watch to ensure that no power is delegated directly over and favoring one state over another. That is why a national popular vote is not the way of a republic. If a national popular vote system were to be established here, the votes from smaller states with lesser population would be basically irrelevant, and the smaller states would not have their interests protected. Plus, candidates would only have to campaign in largely populated states because those states hold the most weight in the election. Why bother going to, say, Connecticut when you can go to California and make way more headway? Basically, if that were the case, only California, New York, Texas, or Florida would get the attention of candidates, leaving the rest of the states in the dust. So essentially, having an electoral college works best because it preserves state sovereignty and because it ensures that the president does not become a monarch ruler representing the people. The sole job of the president is to represent the interests of the states in foreign affairs. So what happens when we cast our vote is that basically our vote tells electors who are representing us in our state who we would like as our president. Our voice is used as a strong recommendation to how our electors should vote on our behalf. And every state is given their own authority over how electors are chosen, which is where we could either succeed or fail in the way that we elect good and able leaders. The electors that are put into the Electoral College are there specifically to act as an unbiased mediator and are to elect a representative based upon the likelihood that they'd act wisely on behalf of the state. This whole system may not make sense until you apply it to a relatable situation, so I've come up with one. See, a family with 5 children wants to go out for dinner, and mom and dad ask the children where they like to go. 2 of them say they want Fleming's, and the other 3 say they want Yard House. The parents hear the request of the children and contemplate which decision would benefit the whole family. They decide to go with Yard House, a nice but still reasonably priced restaurant, over Fleming's, the fine dining restaurant, because they are wanting to meet the entire family's needs and make the decision that will be best for everyone given the different opinions casted by their children. Weird example, but same sort of principle with the Electoral College. They are listening to the people and are supposed to vote in the best interests of the state as a whole. So in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, the Constitution states that each state is to appoint electors with a number equal to their state's representatives in Congress. And it specifically states that no senator or representative holding office is to be appointed as an elector. So what that does is it severs any possibility of an elector voting based upon their attempts to get reelected. And again, the Electoral College was supposed to be grouped together with no bias mingled in between. So no party preferences, no bribes. It's supposed to just be a no-nonsense group appointed for one particular job, which is to look at the people's response to the candidates for president and cast their vote accordingly. As I mentioned, the Constitution here also states that each state can determine the manner in which the electors are chosen. And that is to ensure that some form of state independence and sovereignty is protected, which I understand. But the problem is that states have not upheld the principle of keeping the electors separate and unbiased. So, for example, in California, the Electoral College is made up of people appointed by each party. So the Republicans can appoint these people, the Democrats can appoint those people, and the other weird random parties can appoint their people to make up the number which is equal to our representatives in Congress. That alone is a major problem that was never supposed to occur and is arguably unconstitutional. But the main reason why our presidential elections have been unconstitutional for over 170 years can be found in Clause 3 to 6 of Article 2, Section 1. The original version of these clauses states that electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for 2 different people, one for president and one for vice president. They are to make a list and sign to certify their number of votes for each person and send that certification to the seat of the government of the United States, the President of the Senate. It is there on January 6th, in the presence of both the Senate and the House of Representatives, that all of the certified votes from the electors are to be counted, and the person having the greatest number of votes shall be president, if that number be the majority of all the electors appointed. Then the person who received the second greatest majority would become vice president. There was no such thing as running partners. And if there were a tie, the House would choose by ballot, and each state would get one vote from their representation. The 12th Amendment came in and changed these articles so that they now say the electors are to meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for president and vice president. In Clause 4, it says that they are to name on one set of ballots the person they voted for president, and on a different set of ballots, the person they voted for as president. It is here where we have gone wrong, because there was not supposed to be this two-man band that came in when a president was elected. It wasn't where the president chose his vice president, and to vote for one was to vote for both. The reason this is unconstitutional is because in the case where no president can be found as the absolute winner, the constitutional process would transform the Congress into a parliamentary cabinet where limited government and the rights of the people are violated and governmental preference is asserted. Let me explain. What happens when a candidate cannot be determined as being president-elect? What happens if there is a tie? The 12th Amendment says, if no person receives a majority for president, then the House of Representatives must immediately elect the president by ballot. They must choose him or her from the three persons with the highest number of votes, and choosing the president, the votes must be taken by states, and each state will have one vote. A quorum for this purpose will consist of at least one member from 2/3 of the states, and a majority of all the states will be necessary for the election to be final. Separate from that is a clause that states if there is a vice presidential tie, then the Senate goes through the same process. The main reason these two positions of office are separate on the ballot, or at least were intended to be, is because there are very unlikely chances that both of these positions end up in a tie during the exact same election. But for whatever reason, in about 1832, political parties started to run with running mates, and their actions were never put in check. So by the year 1844, the practice became the rule of thumb for presidential elections, but was never legally adopted through the Constitution. Keeping them separate ensures that the people and Electoral College have the direct say in at least one of those offices, given the chance that a tie occurs in one of the two. But in our current way of doing it with running mates, if there is a tie for the presidential election, it's the same as there being a tie for the vice president position. So what happens then? When electors vote with a running mate, if a tie occurs, then it would give Congress a parliamentary way of electing, and both the president and the vice president would essentially become Congress's lapdog rather than the state's watchdog. This way of doing things is also dangerous because the vice president acts as the president pro tempore if no president is securely elected by January 20th, which is the first day of a new presidential term. If they are on the same ballot, then the Congress will also select a person to fill the position until the proper selection is made. And if we had faithful, honest men and women of integrity in our legislative branch, then this would not be such a great concern. But because that is unfortunately not the case, this little loophole to congressional power based upon our lack of discipline in keeping the words of the law of the land becomes an open target to foreign and domestic entities who seek to see America fall. Keeping Congress out of the direct election of a presidential figure was fundamental to ensuring that our nation did not end up being run by power-driven leaders. In a parliamentary system, the president is part of the Congress, so the two parties do not check each other. But in a presidential system, the president is in a separate branch of government from the Congress, and therefore the two must work together and check each other in their positions. And of course, to understand these warnings given by our founders, we can simply pick up our handy-dandy Federalist Papers and read directly from the letters of these men. I'm serious. You can literally open the Federalist Paper journal and go to number 68, and you'll see a title called "The Mode of Electing the President" by Alexander Hamilton. There are some very interesting things in there, especially regarding warnings of corruption and against enemy attack from within. What I find most interesting is that his warning seems all too familiar to what we have currently in our administration. So hold on tight, we'll be right back with Federalist 68 after this brief intermission. To really understand what Alexander Hamilton was trying to tell the people about the election of president, I kind of just want to take you through a summary of Federalist number 68 because I think it will really give us a more complete picture. So to open with, Hamilton says that the mode of appointment for the president was designed to be pretty well guarded so that it may not be perfect, but at least it is excellent in structure. In the second paragraph, Mr. Hamilton talks about how the people are to be involved. He says that it was desirable that the sense of the people should operate in the choice of the person to whom so important a trust was to be confided. This end will be answered by committing the right of making it, not to any pre-established body, but to men chosen by the people for the specific purpose and at the particular conjuncture. So essentially, that is saying the established body of the Electoral College is not to be a pre-existing body of legislators or any form of government official. It's supposed to be a group of people chosen for the specific purpose of listening to the choice of the people and applying accordingly. Then in the following paragraph, he talks about the character that is to be looked for in choosing an elector. And character is really such a big component that will either make or break good leadership. We know that the Bible talks about wisdom in two different ways. It talks about earthly wisdom and godly wisdom. Godly wisdom comes from the fear of the Lord, and to fear God means that you respect him and his commands, including the command to love and serve others. That servant mindset of seeking wisdom from God is what we should be looking for in electing officials. In fact, in James 3, verses 13 to 18, it says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth. This wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly, sensual, demonic. But where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace." Hamilton specifically states that the election should be made by men most capable of analyzing the qualities adapted to the station. So he's saying, there are certain qualities that must be found in order to be a good choice for filling the role of president. And the people who are to make the election should be able to analyze these qualities in others. He continues by saying that they are supposed to be acting under circumstances favorable to deliberation and to a judicious combination of all the reasons and inducements which were proper to govern their choice. So they should be going through the proper analytical process in order to determine who is best fit for the position and not selecting based upon their own opinions. After that, Hamilton gets into why the system is necessary in a presidential election. He says, it was also peculiarly desirable to afford as little opportunity as possible to tumult and disorder. The precautions which have been so happily concerted in the system under consideration promised an effectual security against this mischief. The choice of several to form an intermediate body of electors will be much less apt to convulse the community with an extraordinary or violent movements than the choice of one who was himself to be the final object of public wishes. Right there, he's talking about the choice of several people being the national popular vote and how they'd be more open to mass chaos and violence where neighbor influences neighbor or third-party organizations come in to pay people off than for the choice of a few to be the final objects of the public wishes in an electoral college system. And now for the really good stuff. Are you ready? Because your jaw might drop. He says, nothing was more to be desired than that every practicable obstacle should be opposed to cabal, intrigue, and corruption. The most deadly adversaries of Republican government might naturally have been expected to make their approaches, but chiefly from the desire in foreign powers to gain an improper ascendant into our councils. How could they better gratify this than by raising a creature of their own to the chief magistrate of the Union? Strangely familiar, no? He concludes, but the convention have guarded against all dangers of this sort with the most provident and judicious attention. They have not made the appointment of the president to depend on any pre-existing body of men who might be tampered with beforehand to prostitute their votes, but they have referred it in the first instance to an immediate effect of the people of America. The immediate agents in the election will at least enter upon the task free from any sinister bias. The business of corruption, when it is to embrace so considerable a number of men, requires time as well as means. Even in 1788, there was an understanding of the quite possible attempt of a foreign power to implant a fraudulent, or puppet-like, if you will, executive officer into one of America's greatest positions of governmental authority as a means of crippling us from within, weakening our infrastructure, our economy, our morale, and bringing us to the brink of destruction. And what happens then? Well, the implant's guardians will come in and finish the job. And there, at the very end of the excerpt I just read, Hamilton says that this type of plan requires time as well as means. It takes time and money to plan to destroy a nation. And let me just tell you, that plan to destroy America has been in the works since we first got our start. And on the outside, it might look like it's Russia, Germany, Britain, or China who is our adversary, but it is more than that. It is the same player behind the curtain. The enemy roams around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. He is looking to devour freedom from the face of this earth. He is looking to sow destruction because he wants to burden the Lord. And how do you best hurt someone? You hurt the ones they love. But God says to us, do not fear or be faint-hearted, because our eternity is hidden with Christ. And for as long as we are here on earth, we are to be good stewards over what he has blessed us with. Not everyone has the opportunity to be born in America. People put together rafts made of trash to come here because of the freedom that has been offered to Americans since 1776. It is so important that we be diligent in preserving such a great blessing. America eventually will come to nothing because that's what the Word of God says. It says the nations will fall. But to know the outcome does not mean that we just become stagnant. We all know we're going to die eventually, but we don't just sit on the couch all day waiting for that day to come. We go out and we proclaim Christ. That is why it's important to uphold freedom. Yes, we can go and preach in nations where the gospel is outlawed, but what our founders did in establishing this nation was they outlined freedom as it is seen through the eyes of God, being equal, being blessed with life and liberty. Remember that quote that I read to you from William Penn that says that America will either have a good or bad government depending upon the men that are in office? If the men are good, then the government cannot be bad. But if the men are led by their wicked hearts, then the government can never be so good. Noah Webster told his students, when you become entitled to exercise the right of voting for public officers, let it be impressed on your mind that God commands you to choose for rulers just men who will rule in the fear of God. The preservation of a Republican government depends on the faithful discharge of this duty. If the citizens neglect their duty and place unprincipled men in office, the government will soon be corrupted. Laws will be made not for the public good so much as for selfish or local purposes. Corrupt or incompetent men will be appointed to execute the laws. The public revenues will be squandered on unworthy men, and the rights of the citizens will be violated or disregarded. If a Republican government fails to secure public prosperity and happiness, it must be because the citizens neglect the divine commands and elect bad men to make and administer laws. So to conclude, the type of leader we have is dependent upon our civic engagement. We can either have a potentate who rules supremely because of our years of negligence and the lack of vigilance. We can have a puppet who is directed by our foreign adversaries, crippling us from within. Or we can elect a true president who works on behalf of the states. But we won't get these results from the top down. It must be from grassroots level upwards. And that type of civic engagement, I think, does definitely begin with an understanding of the system, which was my whole intention behind today's episode. It is so important to understand what is constitutional and what is not. But more importantly, we must first and foremost look at the laws that govern men's hearts, because that is where the ultimate change will take place. I hope you have learned a lot from today's episode. Please be encouraged to talk about these truths and to proclaim God's goodness with a bold spirit. And please seek the Lord's guidance on how you can get involved civically. God wants to use us in this world as lights to shine through the darkness. We just need a willing heart. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Have a wonderful week, and God bless.